Welcome back to Web Application Development. So today we're going to graduate to the next level of our learning in PHP. This would be the Object-Oriented Methodology, OOP, Object-Oriented Programming or Paradigm. So we will be dealing with classes and objects. Let me tell you right away, students find this topic a bit challenging. So stay with me. In order to help you, I will try to go through as many exercises as possible, as well as provide you with extra videos. Let's start with a little bit of inspiration or lack thereof. It says confidence is what you have before you understand the problem. But trust me, I've been doing object-oriented programming for quite a while, and as you will see, this is fun. It's a bit challenging in the beginning, but anything that is easy is not fun to do in life. So the agenda for today would be to understand basically what classes are, what objects are, and then we will get into the nitty-gritty of actually implementing a class definition and creating an object based on that class, and how you use the object, how you assign an object, and what that really means. And then finally today we will end with something called a class constant, which is like a constant which you have seen in PHP but within the context of a class. So I know that all these words like class, objects, etc. might sound quite daunting at this point, but don't worry, by the end of today's class you'll be quite familiar with everything there is to know about the basics of object-oriented programming. So I started with an example, students, scores, etc. So I created an extra video for students. There's an introductory video using an example so that it's easy for you to understand, because this is a topic that is close to your heart, grades, etc. So take a look at that video if you haven't already. If you have, then you can discontinue. If you haven't, then please take a look at that first. Let's jump right in and then tell you what the syntax is. So what is a class? It's a collection of variables that are related to each other. In the case of students, that would be the student's name, the student's score, the grade, etc., or whatever else that you want to put in there. That together, that is a data structure that is called a class. A class can take actions based on the properties, the variables, the methods, the functions that take the actions have access to those variables, those properties. So properties and functions together, that is a class. So in order to do that in PHP, you will use the keyword class and a name for the class. Now, the convention is to have the names capitalized. So P is capitalized, and that's not an accident, and that is the convention, and there's a good reason for it. Well, there is a reason for it. It's that it's easy to see that this is a class rather than something else. Okay, so let's define a class called person. So person might have a name and an age. So in our example, we call these var variables, but here we're going to use a keyword private, which is the right thing to do. Var was just an illustration to get started before learning what private properties are and what public properties are. A private property is a property that is accessible to the methods inside the class person. So if you create a class like this, person has two properties, and that's all there is to know. Then we can create a function, and that I'm giving a keyword public to that. The words like private and public, they are called visibility. So this function has a visibility public, which means people outside the class can also access it. So here the function is doing something very simple, just echoing something. So this is all PHP that you already know, except that there is a class that is being defined and two variables inside that, and a function which we will call a method with a visibility attribute called public. So that's all there is to it for now. Now let's see how you will actually save this. Convention again says that you should save it in a file with a name the same as the name of the class, including the capitalization. This is actually important, and you should follow this. Later, next class, you will see why that is important and why that convention actually makes sense. But for now, just take my word for it. You have to name the file that contains a class by the name of the class, which also means that if you have 5 classes, then you have 5 different files. You might be tempted to put all the classes in just one file, but don't do that. Follow this convention. We can actually represent the class that we created, which had a name, person, and it had two private properties, name and age. And the fact that they're private is indicated by this minus sign there. and there was a public method. So the first box here, box number 1, that is the name of the class, capitalized of course, and the second box here, box number 2, will be for the properties, and all the properties are expected to be private. And then we have a third box that would be the collection of methods. In this case, in the class that we are trying to define, we had the name person, 2 private properties, and 1 public function which appeared in the third box, and it is public, and that's why this is plus. So as you can see, the moment you have this representation, this class diagram, then you can immediately write the class. You wouldn't know what drive actually does, what's there, but the skeleton can be written, which means there are programs that can look at a piece of code, PHP, and create this UML diagram, class diagram, or there may be programs that can take this diagram and create the corresponding PHP. All those things are possible. Let's look at the correspondence between this and the PHP code. So the PHP code was this. I want to show you this also. Now you see the class diagram there, and you see the corresponding class in PHP. So you can see the name is just the thing that appears right after class, and the private property is the fact that they are private, indicated by this minus sign and this minus sign. So that you see here, 2 private properties, and the fact that this guy is public is indicated by that, and that's why you see the method public here. So everything that is there to be written in person.php at the skeleton level can be deduced from this so-called UML diagram. What the function does, what the method does, you don't really know by looking at the diagram, but at least you know that there is a function and you know that its visibility is public. Similarly, you can have another class called vehicle, and it's got 2 private properties, the plate number and the type, and then there is 1 public method called printinfo. So let's actually try to implement this in our first exercise. So week 9 resources exercise number 1. So it's this guy, and there is a vehicle.php here, and that needs to have a class. So let's look at the class diagram and implement this. So vehicle, plate number, type, printinfo. Fairly simple. So let's start here. Say class vehicle and private dollar, and what's the first one? Plate number. I think it was either num or number. Plate num. Then private type, and then it had a public function. Method is a function, and that was print info there. So the class skeleton is ready. Now that that is ready, this guy can actually run. So don't worry about the squiggly red line for now. So let's open this in browser. So nothing happens there because print info in here did not have anything there. So let's put something there that says echo vehicle object. And now let's go back to our browser window, and there it is. So I'm running week 9 resources ex1.php, week 9 resources ex1.php, and that's the one that we run. And it says require once vehicle.php, and require once is like an include statement. You might be familiar with import in Python. This does the same thing. Once here indicates that you want to require it only once. There are a few other things that you can do. You could have said require this, that would have worked, but require once is better because what it does is it keeps a count of whether it is already included. In that case, it wouldn't do it again, which is a good thing. Otherwise, if I try to run this, vehicle class is defined here, and I would be trying to define it again in this one, and that will not work. So let's actually see that. See, cannot redeclare the class vehicle because it was already declared. So that is one problem. But if I say require once again there, that problem doesn't happen because PHP says that okay, this is already included, so I don't have to include it again, and that is one. Another way of doing that is to say include. I could have said include vehicle.php. Let's comment out these two things. That works identical to this, but include has a problem that suppose I say include vehicle 1, which is not there, it gives me a warning but tries to continue. But if I say require that, so remember here it was a warning, just a warning, even though it looks scary, it's just a warning. But if it is require, it's an error, it's a fatal error, which means the program will stop. So there are cases where you actually want the program to stop, because if the class definition is not found, it's a very bad error and nothing can work after that, and you should not try to continue from there. So this is like stopping right there. So require is the one that we'll be using almost exclusively, and we'll be using require once. Okay, so we did this. Now let's take a look at what a class is, not from a programming perspective, but in terms of what it actually means. Class is like a template. In the video that we linked to in YouTube, you might have seen how it was described. It is like a blueprint. So given a blueprint, you can create multiple entities of the same kind. If you have a blueprint for a house, you can create, in principle at least, multiple houses of the same kind. Or if you have a blueprint of a car, you can create a lot of cars of the same kind. Or if you have a cookie cutter, a template, you can create a lot of cookies out of it. Cookie cutter by itself doesn't really do anything. You cannot eat it. It doesn't really function. It's not a cookie. But once you create cookies out of it, then you can actually enjoy the cookies. Similarly, a blueprint of a car is not a car, but a car can be created, manufactured out of a blueprint. So it contains all the information necessary to create an object. So a class is a blueprint, object is the instantiation, an instance of that blueprint. So class is the cookie cutter, object is the cookie. The idea is that once you have the template for an object, you have defined everything that is necessary for that object to have. You create one object based on it. You just have to specify what those properties are. For instance, you have a person class and we need a name and an age for the person. Okay, so let's see how this is done. So the first thing that you need to do after you have a class is to create an object corresponding to that class, and that is called object construction or instantiation. Construction will mean that there is a special function inside the class that is there to create the object, that is to construct the object. So in this case, let's say you have a person class, you have name and age, and then there should be some way of actually saying what the name is and what the age is. And that function, that special function, is called the constructor, and that's got a special name in PHP, that is __ construct. The name is important. The casing of the name, it's all lowercase, that is important. And the fact that there are two underscores preceding it, that also is very important. So one of the common mistakes that my students have made in the past is to create a constructor and have only one underscore before it. It just will not work. That is not special enough. __ construct is a special function, and that is the function that will be called when you try to construct an object. So this is a constructor. So constructor can take any number of parameters, arguments. In this case, we are passing the constructor two arguments, name and age, and inside the constructor, what we are saying is that the name of the current object that is being constructed, that is called $this. That is again a special variable. $this means the object that is being constructed right now. That has a property name, and that property is what this guy refers to, and that has to be set to whatever name that you pass to this function. I know that sounds a bit wishy-washy, mainly because we use the same variable name here, and this all looks kind of weird, but that is the standard way of doing it by convention, so we'll stick to it and we'll understand it using a couple of examples. Okay, so typically what you will have in the constructor will be a list of arguments that are the same as the private properties, and then you will be assigning those private properties of the object that is being constructed using the values that are passed as variables. As you can imagine, this did not really have to have the name $name. It could have just had $n here, and instead of saying it here, $name, you might have said $n. That would work just fine. It's just that it is a lot neater and intuitively comprehensible if you actually use the same name, same variable name. Okay, first of all, you have to create this special function called the constructor, which is __ construct. And then you have to use a keyword called new, which we have come across in creating new students of name Alice and her score, etc. So what you will do is to create a new variable called Harry, and you will say that is new, which is a keyword, person, which is a class, and it takes two arguments. When you say new person, what PHP is going to do is to go to the definition of the class person and look for __ construct, call it, and whatever you pass here will become the arguments to that constructor, and that's what's going to happen. And if you want to create another object, say Mary, Mary will be a new person with name Mary and age 27. But in order for this to work, obviously PHP needs to know what this person class is, and that has to be included by using require once. So let's see how it actually works. So let's run through this piece of code as though we were PHP. So we come here, start a PHP block, and first thing we see is a require once. So we will read we as in we are PHP, and there we will know, after having read that, we will know what person is, and person is in this file that is defined here, and we'll know that there is a name, there is an age, and there is a constructor. So this much we as PHP we will know. And then we come to the next statement here, Harry. What do we do? So when we say Harry is a new person, immediately PHP will create a variable Harry, which is a memory location somewhere, that will point to another structure, memory location somewhere else, which is ready to host an object of type person. That memory location will contain a name because there is a private property called name, and originally that will be just null, and then there is an age that also will be null, the starting point, and then PHP will call the constructor. So after having created this memory location ready to host a person, it will call the constructor, and there constructor comes in with two arguments, two dummy variables, and in this case name here is actually Harry because you're calling new person with Harry and 35. Name is Harry and age is 35. So the first statement inside that function, because the function is called this name, this stands for the current object that is being created, which is this is $this, okay, and there in the place of name, that box, I will fill it with the name that is being passed there, and in the box age I will fill it with the age that is being passed to the function. Now let's actually try to create a constructor in our vehicle.php. So this is in exercise number 2 here. Vehicle.php is already there because we created it earlier, and here we're going to actually add a constructor. So let's add a constructor. So constructor will have to be public because people need to be able to create this. Public function __ construct. So we will use plate number and type, and in here we will say $this, plate number is $plate number. This thing is so standard that if you have some copilot or something, all these things will be done for you almost immediately. And also the later versions of PHP have ways of doing this without actually having to write all these things. So that is a constructor, and then we're supposed to create a vehicle v1 with plate number 27 and a type car. That will be in our ex.php. So in the beginning it's null. Let's, instead of null, let's say it's a new vehicle, and plate number was 27, type was car. v2 37 and truck. Let's open this in a browser. So PHP actually prints it out that way. Quite nice. So private property plate number is 27. Private type is a car for v1, and for v2 it is a 37 truck. Now how do you call a method inside an object? So Harry, remember Harry is a person, and a person has a method to drive. So person has got two properties, name and age, private, and a method to drive. So this should be minus and plus here, that is public. So how do you actually call it? So the way to call it is, after you create Harry as a new person, after you instantiate person as an object, Harry has the method to drive, and you use this special operator, minus and greater than sign, that is an arrow. So Harry's drive, we call Harry's drive. So when you call Harry's drive, it actually invokes the method drive from within person. It is not the drive that is there in the global scope. It is actually from within person. That is almost like a limited scope. So then it'll echo that. So it'll just say, hi, I'm driving a car. And if you create a new person, call it Bob, and then you ask Bob to drive, then Bob also will call its specific drive function from within its object, and it will also say, I am driving a car. So from Harry you will get I'm driving a car, from Bob you'll get I'm driving a car. That's not very interesting because you keep seeing the same message. So let's try to make it slightly more interesting. So let's actually change the method try so that it says Harry is driving a car or Bob is driving a car. How do we do that? Remember this special variable called $this, that refers to the current object that is accessible from within the object anywhere. So from some other function, not merely the constructor, the other function drive, $this is still there. You can actually use $this and the name, which is a private property of $this, and then you just say $this name drives a car. So that is a full class now. So I have two private properties and one public method drive. If it is Harry, then I'm getting Harry's drive method, and Harry's drive method will be from within Harry. This name will be Harry, and I'll say Harry drives a car. From Bob's drive, that will be in a different memory location, different function somewhere else, and that function will have $this name, and in that case it's going to be Bob drives a car. Okay, we define two private properties, name and age. So it's private, that means from outside the class, from outside an object, you cannot actually access this. From within the object, you can use $this and access that using $this arrow name, you will get it. From outside the object, how do you do this? So a couple of ways of doing it. The right way of doing it is to create what we call a getter, which is a get name. So name, remember, it's camel cased, and name comes from the variable name. So get name will return this name. So that is the standard format in which a getter works, and it's again so standard that this can be automatically created by Visual Studio Code, for instance. So that's the getter, and similarly there is a setter also, which is again a public function. Getters and setters are public so that people from outside the class can access them. And set name, and you sent as name, and this name, that is the name of the current object, set it the value of the dummy variable that you passed. In modern standard programming practice, this actually returns $this. So it will have one more statement that returns the current object, which makes it possible for you to chain multiple methods, but it's not very important at this point in our PHP life. But if you see return $this here and there, don't panic. It is intentional, it's not a mistake. If you want to access the name of an object, suppose you create Harry with Harry and 35 name and age as a new person, and Harry's get name will return $this name, which will be $Harry name, which is just Harry. And if you actually try to access it directly, this will throw an error because inside person name is a private property, and if you try to access it directly, it'll give you an error, which is actually a nice thing. That way people cannot mess with your internal properties, and they are actually encapsulated within the class. And how do you modify it from outside the class? Again, you have to use the set name method. Suppose it was Harry and then you want to change it to Hurry or something, and that's the way you do it. This, the second way here, setting it to something else directly, will throw an error again because the visibility of the property name is private. Now you might wonder why not just make it public, and if you do make it public, this guy will work, but that is not standard practice and it's not the right thing to do. When I started programming object-oriented in PHP, whenever I needed to modify an attribute, a property, I just made it public, and I did it, and by luck or by discipline, I did not make any major mess, but you're not supposed to do it. That's not the right way of doing it. And from now on, when I do this kind of things, I will always use getters and setters. Let's take a look at this special variable $this. $this has a life only within the class definition. So when you are accessing Harry's get name, what it is doing is saying that $this is actually this guy here. That is $this because I'm referring to $Harry. This is actually that, and the name there is actually that little guy there. Now I say echo Mary get name, then again in the class definition is just this, but in this case $this is actually that object, that memory location, that memory layout, and in there is a name, and that is actually Mary. And that's how it will work. Now remember the curly syntax that we used in doubly quoted strings so that we could echo them. So that actually works with getters also, which is nice. Instead of doing string concatenation like that, it is possible to use curly braces. So you can learn more about curly braces from that link if you want to. Now the third exercise is calling a method, accessing a property, etc. So we need to add 2 getters and 2 setters, and we have to change the print info so that it says something like a car with plate number 27, etc. Okay, exercise number 3. In the driving program in ex3.php, we have the class definition coming from there, and then we have 2 vehicles that are created here. This is should be completely obvious to you, and then there's a print info. So here it will print whatever is there as the print info method inside vehicle.php. So we have to take a look at that. There I have a print info that says $this type. That means the type of the current object with the plate number, the current plate number. So what you need to keep in mind is that these curly braces are necessary, otherwise it will not work. So let's go through this class. So there's a private property plate number, a type, another private property, and constructor calling it with 2 dummy arguments, plate number and type, which will get unpacked into the private properties of the current object, $this. And I have getters, get plate number, which returns the current plate number, get type returns the current type, and there's a setter, set plate number. This plate number will just become the plate number that is given to it. This is a dummy variable. Similarly, set type with the dummy argument to $type will set the current object's type to whatever the value is being passed to it, and print info will just echo. So let's see that in action here. So here what we are doing is creating 2 objects and then printing the first one and then printing the second one. After that, we are setting the first one's type to van, the second type to bus, and then printing info again and again. So let's see. So original, a car with number 27, truck with number 37, and then you call set type V1 and V2, and the type of the car, the first object V1 was changed to van, the type of V2 was changed to bus, and that's that. Now, one more interesting thing is about assigning objects. When we say Harry is a new person is laid out somewhere in the memory, and then because of the constructor, it gets the name and age properties. And similarly, there's another location, Mary, and with name Mary and age 27. Now, suppose I say another Mary is equal to Mary. So this is an assignment. This equal sign is an assignment. What's happening? What's going to happen is actually not a deep copy. It's going to be a shallow copy. The mere fact that you have another Mary on the left-hand side creates a memory location, another Mary, and then it gets the same object Mary. That means it's actually pointing to the same object in the memory location. So this is important. It's important to keep in mind. So if you say Harry equal to Mary, what happens is that Harry, that link will get broken. That object is still in the memory, but it's not referenced by anybody. And then Harry gets pointed to the Mary's original object, and this guy becomes this memory location becomes garbage, which might get garbage collected and deleted properly through the operating system's memory management, etc. But there is no way to access this guy anymore. The reference is actually gone from our scope. Okay, so exercise 4 is just to see this. I will actually let you do this rather than go through the solution here. Then another thing is a constant. Remember, we had a constant in PHP that was defined in the global scope, something like this. Constant by convention or caps, the keyword is const equal to whatever, and that is a constant. Now you can actually say the same thing inside a class, but it will exist only inside a class, but obviously. So how do you use this? From inside the class, you can use a keyword called self. This is similar to $this, but it is for class-wide entities. So this is the way to access it from within the class. From outside the class, if you don't say any visibility here, it is by default public. So you can access it by circle the class name, pi. Pi being the name of the constant. Suppose I have a class called circle and I create a constant pi and a private property radius. If I want to compute the area of a circle, it is pi r square. And in order to refer to the constant, you would just use the self : Okay. But if you actually want to access the constant pi from outside, not from within the class. So self is kind of similar to $this, except that this is actually for the whole class rather than for an instantiated object. Similarly, once the class is defined, all the public constants in the class can be accessed using this syntax. So $this represents an instance of the class. So that refers to an object of the type class, but self refers to the whole class. In other words, when you create a pi, even though pi appears in all copies of the class, as in all objects created of the type circle, there's only one memory location that holds pi. At least that's what I believe. Okay, $this is always with a $sign, and self doesn't have a $sign. The operator after $this is always the arrow, and for self it is a colon. And now the last exercise would be to complete an ellipse with a constant pi. So plus means it's public, but even if you don't say public, it is by default public. And then two private properties A and B, and construct and compute the area. Well, let's take a look at the solution. So exercise number 5, ellipse. So const pi, this is public by default. Then two private properties, the major and minor axis lengths, the two radii of the ellipse. And so this A is A, this B is B. And the area of an ellipse is pi R1, R2, radius 1, radius 2, and that's that. And then you can create a form to do this. So you can actually create, you can play with things that you have already learned. Process PHP is here, which uses the class ellipse, and then it unpacks A and B coming from the form, creates an ellipse, and then the area is ellipse compute area, and it just echoes that. And if you want to echo the value of pi, just use the colon notation on the class. Now, a couple of more exercises for you to play with classes and objects in conjunction with a form. So we learned classes and objects. Classes are like cookie cutters. They are like a mold out of which a cookie can come. So it's a blueprint out of which you can create instantiated objects. Inside the class, you have private properties and methods. They may be private or public. Constructors are public. And the default visibility, by the way, for everything is actually public, which is the reason why for const we didn't have to say public. And then we learned about getters and setters to access the private properties. We saw that $this, when used within the class, it actually refers to the current object being worked on, be it creation or some other kind of access. Then we saw self : to access things that we will later call static, like constants and maybe other things also. Then remember, assignment for objects is not a deep copy, it's a shallow copy. If you create Harry and Mary, then you say Harry equal to Mary, then the original Harry gets destroyed and Harry gets the same reference as the variable Mary. If you say Harry get name, look at the name of Harry, it will actually be Mary because it's actually referring to the same object.